Hi, I'm Ross here, and today I have Audiovalve Solaris. Yes, this big beast of an amp that everyone has been asking, what is this thing? Well, some years ago, actually probably over a decade ago, one of the most kind of famous high-end amps was the Audiovalve RKV Mark II. Well, there's a Mark I, obviously, there's a Mark II. And that amp was kind of got my curiosity when it was kind of going on my head-fi journey. Had quite a reputation, but getting hold of one second hand was kind of very difficult. They're very rare, and people tend to hang on to them. It was, it's a big beast of a thing like this, with lots of heavy brass knobs and brass feet and what have you. And I eventually got hold of one second hand and had it in here. And the interesting thing was an output transformerless amp, and that is, it had a high output impedance, probably around 50 to 100 ohms, and of course was very good with the popular headphones at that time, such as the Sennheiser HT600 and HT650. Of course, the HT800 had just come out, and I used it with that with great success, because the HT800s are kind of 300 ohms. Now the thing is, it came with an optional impedizer box, and basically a box with transformers in it. You plug it into the headphone socket and have an output which could be 4, 8, 16, 32 or 64 ohms. And so you could use it with either low impedance headphones via headphone sockets on the front, or it had a little speaker tap so you could actually plug it into speakers, and I plugged it into some basic Paradigm speakers and used it that way as well. So it's an interesting thing, and with later versions of the RKV and later versions of the Audiovalve amps, they have the transformers built inside the amp. And so as things have gone on, the interesting thing that came up was there was a particular Frenchman along with his friend, who found that they particularly liked using the RKV with the impedance box, and they liked using it with a Stax energizer. And energizers are kind of powered adapters that takes the high current but low voltage speaker outputs from an amp, and they change it into a high voltage low current output for electrostatic speakers. And they're kind of a basic way of running electrostatic speakers off of a speaker amp. Now, they thought the particular combo with the Stax SR009s was really good, and were kind of, actually on head-fi, they were kind of annoying about it, and we kind of ended up pissing people off on the threads, which is a kind of interesting story. But it prompted Helmut Becker of Audiovalve to make the Solaris, which was all his kind of technology into a headphone and preamp in one box. And it's also got it's got 12 watts of output, and it has a phono stage built in, an optional DAC built in, and even without the DAC it's €5,000. So it's quite an expensive amp, but it does offer a lot. It offers everything it can do, everything from IEMs up to speakers. It can do susvaras, and it can do Stax, so it has a Stax socket here. So, well, let's get into the details and take a closer look. There's a lot going on the back of the Solaris, and you see a plethora of connections. You have 5 inputs. Going backwards, actually, you have a record loop out here. Input 5 is your phono stage, for which you have your ground connection for that. But input 1 and input 2 can either be balanced or single-ended. So you have a choice there. You can't use both at the same time, obviously, but this allows you to use it in either configuration. Now, they don't have labeled left and right are not labeled on this, but if it follows the normal hi-fi convention, whereas this would be towards the left speaker, this is actually the left input, this is towards the right speaker, it's the right input. Same here, left, right, and right. And you have your speaker outs here, and if there was a USB DAC built in here, I guess this would be the USB input, and I guess the card or whatever would be bolted on here. Not sure if that's not a bit too close actually to the speaker output, so I do wonder about that, but I don't have one to test. So that's kind of the back of the Solaris, and now onto the front. So there's a lot going on the Solaris front panel. You've of course got your headphone sockets on the top left here, your 4-pin XLR, and of course uniquely your Stax jack just next to it. You have your dual Nuctric combo jacks. Now this means that you can use the old balanced standard started by Headroom years and years ago. We have left and right 3-pin XLR connectors, which has kind of died out now. It's kind of non-existent. And then your 6.3mm jacks are actually in the middle of the combo jack, so you can use that, your standard quarter-inch connector there. Now, then you have a whole row of buttons, and you have power on the right-hand side. On the very left, you have your output mode or output impedance mode. Now on the far left is impedance mode, and that makes it a transformer coupled amp. It's used for low impedance headphones. You can use IEMs with it, although it's kind of not really the amp for it. I generally don't recommend using tube amps with IEMs because they tend to pick up more kinds of buzz and other kinds of things, which sensitive IEMs tend to be more noticeable. Then you have kind of, actually the middle setting is not in the middle, it's kind of all the way to the right. It's actually the Stax setting is the next impedance mode. You can actually use it with headphones, but it's designed for use with the Stax output jack. The middle one, of course, is the output transformerless mode, which you'd have the power of the transformers going straight out to the headphones. It actually causes the loudest volume compared to the impedance mode as well, so it does cause somewhat of an increase in volume. And speaking of increases in volume, you have your gain setting is next. The gain setting has 0 and plus 18 dB. So it kind of becomes a little bit dangerous listening with this amp because, you plug in headphones and you forget to turn everything down and you can kind of blow your ears out. So I make sure I turn everything all the way to the left before listening with headphones, even Susvaras, and then kind of go up as necessary. And if you're changing the gain mode and you have the volume up, you want to turn it all the way down first, then change it up and then start playing with your volume very carefully. And the same thing with OTL, because the OTL ends up with an increase in volume for various technical reasons. When I've got it on maximum, I go very carefully from here. With the Susvaras, I know where I'm going, so it's not such a big issue, but it's something I have to be careful about. The next thing with these lovely, very clicky knobs, of course, is the inputs with the Phono stage number 5 there. And the last one is really interesting. It's the balance connector, the balance adjuster. Now, how long has it been since you've seen a balance control on well, certainly not a headphone amp. You usually see them on hi-fi amps, and Audiovalve make hi-fi amps. So this is a really kind of critical thing, but it has one more critical function which is very important. Now, if you remember the amp, what does this amp do as well as headphones? It will power speakers. Now, what will be more annoying than when they plug in headphones and then not being able to disconnect the speakers without physically disconnecting them? That would really be awful. So, of course, you just pull this switch out and it disconnects the speakers. So that means you can, when you're switching from headphones to using speakers, you can do so just with a quick pull of the knob. Now, you know how annoyed I get when I have something which is a headphone amp and a preamp, and I can't switch out the preamp functionality. I can switch off my powered speakers, but if you have something like a power amp, well, it's really annoying having to get up and do that. With this, of course, now they just put the functionality in very simply. So in that, it's a very kind of critical function in there. And if I didn't read the manual, I wouldn't have known. And this is one of those amps that's kind of, while it's not counterintuitive, there's a lot of functionality in here that you kind of have to read about in the amp. The other thing is this volume control is powered. So it comes with this tiny little remote control, which is kind of funky. So that's kind of the front panel of the Solaris. And so now we'll get on to the sound. So now, having spent some time listening with the Solaris, I've managed to evaluate it with everything from IEMs up to a variety of high-end full-sized headphones. So in that, I first started off by testing it with Campfire Audio's Andrometers, and this is not a combination that you'd actually use with the Solaris, but it gives a good idea of how kind of, with very sensitive IEMs, you can test to the level of hiss. And impedance mode, where it's kind of at its optimum for things like IEMs, it actually came across very well. There's a little bit of hum in the background, but otherwise actually was listenable even with very sensitive IEMs. So if, in terms of considering it's an amp that kind of markets itself as being very flexible, this is kind of a kind of critical test. But all the same, on the other end of the scale, my primary headphones I used it with Hi-Fi Man Susvaras, and I've got the Stax SR009S in to test it with as well. I also had a variety of headphones sitting around behind and under the desk. Primarily the Focal Utopias, as they tend to be the most revealing of the characteristics of an amp and the source feeding it. Now, in general terms, its sound was. It didn't have any kind of sound or coloration. It was a very easy driving and easygoing amp. It drove headphones generally with lack of difficulty. It didn't sound kind of like a more in-your-face kind of like, oh, look at me, I'm really trying to drive these headphones hard. Kind of more like the Pro ICANN does. For example, the Susvaras, I listen at moderate listening levels. So, I don't listen that loud. So I wasn't really putting the amp under strain most of the time. And even things, whether it be the Utopias or the Susvaras, it kind of drove them with like a relaxed ease, kind of like your big lazy V8 in car terms. So that made it kind of very easy to use with a variety of headphones and IEMs. It was only kind of when I pushed things that things came a little bit unraveled. So for example, with the Susvaras, if I turn them, the maximum output is through OTL mode, and high gain. And when I turned the volume up on some tracks, then I started to get a little bit of breakup. For example, the Wailing Jenny's Arlington, it starts off with the drums at the start. You want to have really good impact from drums, really good punch in there. I mean, the best I've ever heard, if you hear drums in person, they do really like smack you in the head with the loudness of even a simple drum impact. And the only kind of system I've heard that can reproduce this with some kind of accuracy, with really good accuracy, has been like a large horn speaker system, and that's something else altogether. So it was when I turned the volume right up, above the kind of a fair bit above the kind of listening level I'd normally listen at. Then at that kind of volume, the edge of the drums we started to hear some crackling and some breakup in there, and also on vocals even when they became loud at the higher volumes and things started to break up. Now I suspect that even though it is a 12 watt output amp, it outputs this apparently at 220 ohms, and the Susvara is a 60 ohms. So all amps kind of have like a power curve, and so its ideal power curve is the 220 ohm mark. So it seems like the 60 ohm must be significantly far down from that at higher volumes that things started to break up. Now in comparison, like the Master 9, now this is not the high gain version, which is ideal for Susvaras. The Master 9's, the soundstage seemed more kind of closed in, it seemed more accurate, but it didn't seem like as this like ease of delivery of soundstage at moderate volumes that the Solaris could give. But if I jack the volume up and I can hit 99 on this using the balanced output of the Yggdrasil, doing that, that's where it had no breakup, no problem driving things at all. Even though at the kind of 99 it was above my normal listening level, it was not a really as good a listen as at moderate levels that the Solaris could give, but it was absolutely clean even up to the full volume mark. So that was kind of where things sat with headphones. But with things like Utopias, and I compared it to the Master 9 and the Studio 6, I'd probably say like a detail retrieval, maybe it was a tiny bit behind the other two amps. So, it wasn't, it was only like if I'm really, really kind of careful listening with high quality music, that kind of situation where you could really pick out maybe these amps have a little bit more detail they can extract out of the music. The thing that it does do as an amp is it's very much passes through the quality of your source really clearly. Now I couldn't use vinyl unfortunately. Unfortunately I don't have a turntable, and this one doesn't have the built-in DAC that's included. So I tend to use, when I first use something like Audio GD's R2, R7, that has a slightly euphoric sound, the Solaris passed that through really, really well. It was a really nice listen in that kind of terms. With the Yggdrasil, the Yggdrasil sounds kind of a little bit dry to me in comparison. So, the character of that comes through really cleanly as well. Likewise, the Hugo 2, it's kind of very clean and clear. I mean, ideally, you use the Hugo 2 with, direct to headphone out, but it's kind of like straight down the line presentation, comes through very cleanly through the Solaris. So it was, it was a good amp if you have, you want to hear what your source can do. Now I don't have a full speaker setup, so I couldn't really adequately test the degree to which this acts as a preamp. I've only got fairly basic powered speakers, Adam Artist 3s, but it did a good job. As a preamp, I have nothing in those terms to complain about. Now, unfortunately, also I couldn't test speakers, which was a bit disappointing. Interesting thing, given that its power peak is at 220 ohms, I'm just wondering how well it's going to power speakers at 8 ohms in OTL mode, which is where it's supposed to have its maximum output. So that was kind of a little bit of a worry. Now, if I could test it with speakers, I would, but obviously that's not going to happen. But maybe if you had some very sensitive speakers, something like Zeus or whatever, it might work okay. Now, once Stax arrived, that was another proposition as well. Now, when I first got the Master 9s in, before I even plugged them into the Stax amp, I plugged them into the Audiovalve Solaris and had a listen. And it was quite clear that they were not being able to drive them quite as well as, Stax ear speakers should be driven. There's kind of looseness in the bass, kind of lack of control. I went back and forth between the Stax amp and the Solaris. And, the Solaris kind of wasn't doing quite as good a job as, of course, the Stax amp could do. It was kind of very clearly audible that it just wasn't in control of the drivers as it really should be. And it's kind of, it is kind of a compromise. It's an OTL amp, putting out power through transformers into, Stax headphones, converting may not be the greatest amount of current into what should be a really high voltage, and having to control, and deliver that to drivers that can handle an extremely high slew rate. So that led me to feel that the Solaris is, well, it's a jack of all trades. I mean, it's the kind of thing that, if the money wasn't, 4,600 euros wasn't a bother to you, you could buy that. You could buy a variety of headphones and try them all out, including Stax. I wouldn't buy SR009S headphones to use with it because, that's kind of, you want to use that with a high-end amp, obviously. But, if you bought some, say, L5s or L7s, and you had kind of a variety of mid-high range headphones, Focal Clears, HD800s, that kind of thing, and you wanted, something that would power everything pretty decently, it wouldn't do a fantastic job, but you can enjoy a variety of headphones, and, it's a very versatile amp. But, if you're looking for kind of like the ultimate high-end amp, I think because it's trying to do so much, it kind of misses out on being able to do anything really, really well. Like, it can't do, Susvaras really, really well. It kind of hits a limit there. It can't do ultra detail through the Utopias really well, but like as an all-round device, it was quite competent. So it's been an interesting time living with the Audiovalve Solaris, and it's going to be quite a gap here when this thing goes back home. But that I hope it gave you an idea of what this amp is capable of doing. They do have cheaper versions, which kind of, if you sacrifice some of the features, like a base, if they made it look a basic low impedance output amp, it could be really nice. And the other models are thousands of euros cheaper. So thank you very much to Helmut Becker for lending me the amp, and I'm sorry it took so long to do the review, and I was waiting for the Stax to come. I'd also really like to thank everyone who's been supporting me in the last year. Their support has made these videos possible, so if you would consider something like, if you're the kind of person who'd even buy me a coffee once in a while, consider becoming a Patreon for even a couple of bucks a month. It really goes towards making these videos better, and if 1/10 of the people who subscribe to my channel did that, it would make it very easy to make a heap more of these videos in the future. Also, don't forget to check out my site, headphone-earphone.reviews, or the short URL to it, here.reviews. There are written reviews of all the products, or photographs and other things, so you can see more information there. And if there are any updates on the information, things I missed in the video, don't forget to check out the description below, and also the written reviews that will have some more detail than the videos in some cases. As always, any questions, comments, even criticism, and I do value constructive criticism as well, post them in the comments and I'll read them, consider them, and reply if I can. Anyway, thanks once again for watching, and I'll see you online.